Hi, and welcome. I'm making this YouTube because I wanted to talk about some things that, to clear up some things that seem to be overlooked as people are starting to learn the tarot cards, and that can throw a lot of confusion into stuff when you're learning. One of them is reverse meanings of the cards, and one thing I wanted to mention with that is they work wonderfully. I know a lot of great readers that use reverse meanings. I do not use them, and I don't teach them, but I do teach in a way where people can learn reverse meanings later on, and it works out fine for them. But I've been using the tarot for 50 years now, and so I've seen a lot of changes over time with them. And when I use the Tarot Marseille for the tarot when I read. I teach with the Rider-Waite tarot deck, and my books are written using the Rider-Waite tarot deck because that's pretty much a standard. But I read with the Tarot Marseille, and that's because that's the first deck that I learned with. And back then, in 1969, that was all that was really available in my area anyway, and that's what you had was tarot cards. There was a Tarot Marseille, that was it. And in the instruction booklet that came with that deck, you didn't have reverse meanings. They weren't offered. And the cards you can see are clearly designed not to really use reverse meanings anyway. I mean, if you look at the pips, you'll see that there is no up or down in the design of the cards. Some of them you could figure out a way to make it that way, but a lot of them you can't. They're like playing cards. And this is, but they weren't really thought of to be used with reverse meanings. Arthur Waite came out with the Rider-Waite deck. Now you had pictures of people doing things on those cards that could represent the meaning of the card. And so therefore it can be placed upside down or right side up, and reverse meanings are something that was able to be done. But originally they weren't there. And so that made a big difference. So are they necessary? No, they're not really necessary. Do you have more range in meaning if you use them? I would say that's not really true. I don't think you do. I think it's just a different way of looking at the card, or looking at all the cards. And if you look at the card as you read, if you look at it as meaning a lot of things, whether it's right side up or upside down, or if you're looking at it specifically, if it's turned right side up or upside down, it means something different. It's just a different way of perceiving the card. But the cards can still mean a lot of different things, whether you use reverse meanings or not. Depends on how you want to see the cards. So reverse meanings, are they really necessary? No, they're not. And obviously, they didn't have them originally. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. And you can see here with the different, I have the Rider deck and the Tarot Marseille card next to it, and you can see where they're not really something that the deck wasn't designed to have reverse meanings. The three cards that I'm showing here are the 8, 9, and 10 of Swords on the Rider deck. Well, the 8, 9, 10 of Swords of the Tarot, but the reason I'm showing these particular three cards is because the suit of Swords on the Rider deck seem to have negative overtones to them. And that's another thing that's sort of changed over time too, is depending on which deck you used. The Tarot Marseille, which is from the 1700s or earlier, or the Rider-Waite deck, which came out in 1910, was lost over time and came back on the market in 1970 through U.S. game systems. But if you look at the original, the Tarot Marseille, here we have a Ten of Swords. And tens to me mean completion, whether it's swords, wands, cups, or pentacles. It doesn't make any difference. It's a completion. The suits represent consciousness, of different functions of consciousness. Swords represent your thinking. So I guess you could say the suit, the Ten of Swords, if you want to use the suit, you could say a completion in some type of thinking that you're doing. An answer or a decision is made. Something's complete based on something that was thought out. Or you could just look at it as a completion if you just want to use the numerical value of it. But it's a clean image where it can mean many types of completion. Completions could be wonderful things. Graduation from school would be a completion. Retirement is a completion. These are wonderful accomplishments and wonderful completions. But if you look at the Rider-Waite deck, we have a completion that's very negative looking. And sure, a negative can be a completion can be negative, but not necessarily all completions are negative. So the image, when you have a specific image of what the card can mean, it decreases your range of meaning for the card in some ways, if you let it do that. If you want to just keep looking at the tens as completion and ignore the image, if it fits better as a positive completion in the reading, then you can do that. But you have to keep that in mind as you're reading when you have images like this on the cards. I still think that the Rider-Waite deck is a wonderful deck. I just disagree with Arthur Waite's choices of making the suit of swords negative like this, showing a negative completion. A negative completion in the Ten of Swords is something that a lot of my students don't like. They just don't like the card. A lot of people I know just don't like that card. It's too brutal looking. And completions can be wonderful things. The same goes with the Nine of Swords. 9 swords here on the Marseille deck on the left. Nines mean attainment. Nines are an attainment of some type. And a lot of attainments are wonderful things. The Nine of Swords on the Rider deck, there on the right, shows an attainment of some type of unpleasant reality or awareness of some type, maybe coming out of denial or coming to terms with some sad truth, something that looks like it's a very disturbing thing to come to a realization of knowing. Swords are thinking, so it's an understanding here of your thinking, and it's a sad truth of some type. But not all attainments are sad. They could be something wonderful. And with the Eight of Swords, we have that too. Eights are advancement. And you can see the Eight of Swords on the Marseille deck is, again, it's just a clean image that could be many different types of advancement. Eights are advancement, advancing on something. And so that can be interpreted in many different ways, where the Rider deck has restricted advancement here, a need to take away restrictions or limitations that are stopping you from advancing forward. I need to shed those and get rid of them. So it's a lack of advancement here. And not all decisions in a reading will show any type of restrictions on you advancing on something. You can be, just go ahead and advance. There's no reason to have this type of limited advancement or limited restrictions on advancement here showing in the Rider deck. So, for some reason, Arthur Waite wanted to go with negative overtones on the suit of swords. The three of swords is another one who shows something negative there too. And it really doesn't, threes are creativity. So it really doesn't, it's not important to show something so negative. Anyway, I wanted to bring that up. And I thought it was just important to mention that, 8s are advancement, the 9s are attainment, and 10s are a completion. And the suit, or the Rider-Waite deck, has those as negative aspects of completion, a negative completion, a negative attainment, and a negative advancement. Also, the definitions has changed over time, too. I could look at sources that I was reading back in 1969 on the tarot, and the meanings of the cards were a lot different on the sources than what I'm seeing now on cards like the Ten of Swords. Ten of Swords was a good card. It meant harmony. So harmony doesn't look like this in the Rider-Waite deck. And so it depends on the source at the time and what's changed since then. So I thought I'd mention that. Another thing I'd like to mention too is if the Rider-Waite deck came out in 1910. Again, it's a wonderful deck. I use them in my books. They're a great deck to learn with. But it's a long time ago, and at that time, Arthur Waite also came out with his book, Pictorial Key to the Tarot, which is still available today, that went along with this deck of cards. The deck of cards and the book came out the same year, and they show the illustrations in that book show the Rider-Waite deck as they explain the cards and how to use them. And one thing Waite did in that book is he implies that the major arcana are not used in a card reading. That the major arcana, the 22 major arcana, were more for deep metaphysical study, and they were not used for divination. Only the minor arcana were used for divination. And this is what he implies, and you could see that he also uses reverse meanings, and I'm not too sure if he's the first one to come up with reverse meanings or not, but he has images on all these cards, so you can use reverse meanings where you couldn't do that with the Tarot Marseille. So I would imagine he was the first one to come up with that idea. But this is why, if in that book, there are no reverse meanings for the major arcana. In his book, Pictorial Key to the Tarot, which is still out today, you will not find reverse meanings for the major arcana. Other authors have added them to their work, but the original author of this book and deck of cards did not think that reverse meanings were necessary because you did not use the major arcana in a reading. And I find that to be kind of interesting too. So things have changed a little bit, like I said. And in 1910, this is what Waite was thinking. When I started reading the tarot in 1969, a lot of readers only used the major arcana. So another big change. They didn't use the minor arcana. I would say half the readers out there didn't use the minor arcana at all in their readings. They just used the 22 major arcana. And a lot of them didn't use reverse meanings. So 22 cards read where the cards faced the reader and not reversed. Using that in their readings, they still had millions of different combinations those cards can offer for ideas. And they were very good readings. most people today use the whole deck. Whether you want to go with what deck you use, it doesn't really make any difference. The decks that are out there today are wonderful looking decks, but a lot of them are based on the Rider-Waite deck, because that was the first deck where it had people doing things on all the cards, representing what the card can mean. But the decks that are out there today are wonderful. Like I said, I use the Tarot Marseille. To me, it's a classic deck. It's probably the most authentic deck in circulation today. But that doesn't mean it's the best deck. It's just what I learned with. And the stuff that's out there now, there's beautiful decks. And they're just as good as any deck you want. Whatever you like to use will work just fine. So I just wanted to bring these changes up. I thought they would be kind of interesting to have those in mind as you're learning the cards, that things do change over time. And a lot of the things you're learning right now are not centuries old, including the meanings of these cards. And I just thought those were some interesting subjects that you might be interested in hearing about. All of my books are available on Amazon. They're easy reads, they're fun to read, and they're very informative. They'll all teach you how to read tarot cards. And they all have information in them that you will not find in any other book. Some of it's so old that it's new again, and some of it is just groundbreaking new information. So I hope you like them, and keep throwing cards. Bye.